But George Parker first to UKIP. With the referendum on the EU in their sights, it's not all plain sailing, it seems, for Nigel Farage, is it?
Well, it's not, because, of course, UKIP was set up to get Britain out of the European Union. And now they find themselves in this slightly difficult predicament where Nigel Farage and UKIP could potentially become an obstacle to them achieving what they want to do. Because fundamentally, the problem is that to win this referendum for the no side, the people who want to get out of the European Union, they've got to make a very strong pitch to, I suppose, middle Britain, to undecided voters who are probably more concerned about jobs and the economy than they are about issues such as immigration. And we all know from the polling that Nigel Farage is quite a divisive Marmite political figure. And so there's a problem there that if Nigel Farage becomes the figurehead of the no campaign, that is likely to turn off some of the floating voters in the centre who are more likely to be swayed by arguments about the economy. And I think that's the pickle that they've got themselves into, that the task they set themselves when they were set up could slip out of their grasp if they take too high a profile in the campaign.
And what about the conference shenanigans involving Douglas Carswell, the party's MP, and a major donor, Arron Banks?
Well, that's right. I mean, Douglas Carswell, as you say, UKIP's only MP, believes very strongly that this campaign has to be fought by bringing together a wide group of people from different parties and to focus very heavily on the economy. He thinks migration is an issue, certainly, but he's worried that people who are worried about immigration are probably most likely to vote to leave the European Union already. And that's to win the argument which he cares most about, which is getting Britain out of the EU. They've got to focus on the economy. Arron Banks, on the other hand, this very big donor to UKIP, takes the opposite view, and he's on side with Nigel Farage and thinks the campaign should be very much dominated by UKIP. So there's a big division on strategy, which has turned into quite a bitter personal dispute between the two of them as well.
Well, Jonathan Arnott, there were harsh words between Arron Banks and Douglas Carswell, and Nigel Farage as well, accusing Douglas Carswell of harbouring residual loyalty to the Conservatives. That doesn't look very good, does it?
Well, Arron Banks made some comments that he shouldn't have made. He apologised for those comments. Nigel Farage simply said that Douglas Carswell still is in contact with people from other parties, and of course, for a referendum campaign, of course, there's nothing wrong with that, and that's not the tone or context of Nigel Farage's comments.
Oh, really? I mean, Douglas Carswell was accused of being in a Westminster bubble, wasn't he?
No, I don't think that was. I don't think that was the way that anything was intended at all. Look, UKIP are the ultimate turkeys voting for Christmas in this referendum campaign. You know, myself as a UKIP MEP, I'm trying to put myself out of a job here, get out of the European Union. We're the people in this campaign who can put literally tens of thousands of people on the streets, handing out leaflets, getting involved with the campaign. We're going to be the engine room of this referendum campaign. Look, of course we want to make sure that we're working together with every single campaign organisation out there that we can. Actually, there is a demographic out there that I think that only UKIP can reach, and part of our role in this campaign is going to be to make sure that those people actually do come out and vote, and the immigration issue is going to be key for making sure that we get those people out to vote.
But how do you respond to the idea that no campaigners want to keep Nigel Farage at a distance because they regard him as a divisive figure? He polarises opinion.
Look, we're going to win the argument on immigration. Of course we are. We're going to win the argument on sovereignty. Of course we are. How could we possibly not win those?
Your fingers crossed as you say that.
The economy issue, of course, is the one where they're... You know, this is the one where the huge amounts of scaremongering come from the Europhile side, where they make these ridiculous claims about jobs that depend on trade with the EU. Of course, they depend on trade with the EU. We'd still be trading with the EU if we're outside the European Union. But they scaremonger about these things, and that's an area where we need to make sure. And I think that we all will be coming together on that issue, because I think everybody who is anti-European Union is going to want to come together and bust those myths.
You don't think that Nigel Farage should step aside from the No campaign for fear of harming it?
It would seem absolutely bizarre if you were to rest your star player, put them on the bench when you get to the finals of the World Cup. That's the equivalent of what it would be. We wouldn't be having this referendum now if it weren't for UKIP. Remember, David Cameron was saying there's no need for a referendum. We're not going to have an in-doubt referendum on the European Union. And then, of course, he changes his tune. Why does he change his tune? Because it's pressure that UKIP brought to bear. Look, we've just got 4 million votes in a general election. We've been the third party at a general election. It's amazing, isn't it, to consider that we've had Conservative, Labour, Lib Dems for so long that another supposedly minor party comes along and displaces one of those three at a general election. We won the European elections. That's the time that the EU issue was a single issue, and when that single issue election happened, UKIP beat everybody else in that election.
Let me bring in Natalie Bennett at this point, the leader of the Green Party in England and Wales. You also have one MP, and this EU referendum argument is going to really perplex MPs, well, for the next year or so at least, isn't it?
Well, I think certainly at Green Party conference there's been no perplexing at all. We actually had an emergency motion this afternoon on this, in which there was a very large, overwhelming majority on the floor of conference supporting a Green Remain campaign, a very strong message that says we want to remain in the EU, we're an internationalist party, we need to work together, but also very much stressing that we need to reform the EU. The Green Party has, of course, been very much at the forefront right across Europe in opposition to the proposed EU-US free trade deal known as TTIP. We're very much saying we need a people's Europe, a social Europe, and we'll be delivering both of those messages, remain and reform. Those messages are very clear and very certain from this conference.
Now that you've got Jeremy Corbyn stepping on a lot of your ground on public spending, on welfare, on nationalising the railways, are you finding it rather difficult now to set yourself apart? Hello, Natalie Bennett. Oh, she seems to have gone for 1 second. She's on the line, but we'll get her back. But for the moment, let me just go back to you, Jonathan Arnott, because we were talking about the campaign. And there are two campaigns, as we know at the moment, trying to keep Britain out of the EU, leave.eu or Business for Britain. If Business for Britain gets the go-ahead from the Electoral Commission to lead the No camp, you will join that, will you?
Well, it's very much a hypothetical question, because I think what's going to happen at the end of the day is that both campaigns will end up coming together and will end up working under the same umbrella in one way or another. So, of course, you have to give your backing to whatever the No campaign is, whichever it happens to be, and we will do that.
Nigel Farage, though, listening to his speech, effectively seemed to be saying if he has to sacrifice his party to put everything into the referendum campaign, he will. Are you happy with that? Do you want to go back to being a one-issue party, a single-issue party, effectively?
Just look at what's happening in the media since the general election. There are two key issues in British politics, actually. The two key issues have been the European Union referendum and the immigration issue with the current refugee crisis that has been so badly exacerbated by the European Union getting it wrong. So those are actually the issues of the day at the moment. So when we talk about the issues of the day, there's no surprise. We don't want to be a single issue party. You look at the manifesto we produced for the 2015 general election. It was the only one of any party that had it independently, professionally costed, that people could know our sums added up. We talked about a complete variety of issues. But look, if the two main issues of the day happen to be European Union and immigration, and UKIP are known on European Union and immigration, guess what? We're going to talk about the issues which are the issues of the day.
Well, Natalie Bennett, before we lost you on the line, but we've got you back now, I was asking you about how you were going to try to define the difference between your party and Jeremy Corbyn's now that he's standing on your ground on things like public spending, welfare and nationalising the railways. You seem to come up with an answer at the conference saying the Greens are different from Labour because only they are serious about the environment. And yet you told me 2 years ago when I interviewed you on this programme that the environment wasn't number one priority. So which is it? I don't know whether it's the questions I'm asking or whether there is a real problem with the line. Jonathan Ashworth, let me come to you then. Apologies for the line and the problem with that. But sure. When it comes to this question about the EU, again, it's a problem defining what Labour's position will be. Are you absolutely confident now that Labour's position regarding the EU is established and set? Because you know that Jeremy Corbyn was giving some signs that he wasn't necessarily absolutely committed to staying within the EU.
No, I think Jeremy has clarified the position, and I'm entirely confident that we will campaign to remain in the European Union. That's the position of the Labour Party. Alan Johnson has got a very important job leading the Labour campaign on that, and Hilary Benn has been very clear arguing that Labour will campaign to remain in the EU. What we want to do is put more emphasis, if you like, on the social Europe, the social aspects of being in the EU. And the argument that, if David Cameron waters down the rights of employees in the workplace, that in itself is not an argument to leave the European Union. For me, that is an argument to elect a Labour government to renegotiate and put those employers' rights back on the agenda at an EU level.
And what about the arguments that come from UKIP about the need to campaign and focus their campaign very heavily on one of these key issues, which is Europe?
Well, UKIP. This is what UKIP have been waiting for all their life, isn't it? But I think when you talk about the jobs at risk, the investment that is at risk, the workers' rights at risk, depending on what the Prime Minister negotiates, I think people will be very wary about voting to leave the EU, but we'll be campaigning very hard to persuade them to stay in the EU.
Jonathan Arnott, it will be a battle commencing, won't it? But obviously there is going to be a point where you have to decide who leads the out campaign and what sort of stance it takes. How quickly do you think it will be before we know that?
Could take a little while. I mean, don't get me wrong here. Labour, there are people in the Labour Party who will be campaigning to leave the European Union. There are people in the Conservatives who will be campaigning to leave the European Union. We don't exactly know who those people are going to be yet. We want to work together with them, of course, but we don't know who they're going to be. We're in a brilliant position in the Leave campaign at the moment, because we've just seen a YouGov poll tonight that actually shows Leave is ahead by 3 points, ahead of Remain. And that's before we've even really started to get the message across. We've not been able to counter the kind of scaremongering you've just heard there from Jonathan Ashworth, saying somehow that workers' rights would be at risk, that the UK didn't, decade in, decade out, make sure before we joined the then EEC that we were giving more and more rights to our workers. All the comments about jobs that would be at risk. But
Jonathan
if we have a
Ashworth,
free trade agreement, we know that we keep those jobs.
He probably has a poll to back up his own view. Now, I hear that we have Natalie Bennett back, I think on the telephone. Hello, Natalie. You are there. Hello. No, you're not. OK, right. Well, look, there is clearly a very big problem with that line. I want to move on to talk about Syria, because there is going to be a vote. The Prime Minister is very likely to ask MPs to extend attacks on ISIS and extend airstrikes into Syria. First of all, Jonathan Arnott, your party position is what on this?
The background to this, of course, is that the public is very mistrusting of UK becoming militarily involved in third countries after what we've seen in Iraq and in Afghanistan, where we've seen a lack of a clear military objective, we've seen a lack of clear strategy, and that has led to problems becoming worse rather than better, to all sorts of confusion. Now, if we get to a point where a government has a clear strategy, clear plan, clear military objective, clear reason and rationale for what they want to do, then you look at it at the time that is proposed. The problem is we've not seen that sort of thing really on the table. We've not seen anything thought through that tells us exactly what they plan to achieve by doing it. We're in a position now where the armed forces have been getting smaller and smaller over a considerable period of time because the government simply hasn't invested in what it should. And then finally, you've got the fundamental problem behind that, which is that in Syria, of course, you've got Assad, which is a regime that Cameron wanted to bomb just a couple of years ago.
Indeed.
And you've got ISIS, but where is the third alternative? Where is the option? You can't bomb both sides into oblivion, so you need to make sure that there is a clear, coherent alternative available before you even consider military action.
Jonathan Ashworth, what is your position if we are talking about considering extending support? Do you think you could personally support it?
Well, there's a degree of overlap between Labour Jonathan and UKIP Jonathan here. I would want to see what the government is actually proposing, what the military basis would be, what the legal basis would be. I'd want to see what plans the government has to try and work with other nations, to bring them together to find a political solution. What is the role of Russia in this? What is the role of Iran in this? I strongly believe the Prime Minister should be going to the UN this week to be part of trying to pull other nations together to find a political solution. My understanding is the Foreign Secretary who will be speaking at the UN, not the Prime Minister. I think that's a missed opportunity, if I may say so.
And you are calling for an extension or the setting up of no-fly zones, aren't you, as a party?
Well, I believe Hilary Benn will be talking more about this in his speech tomorrow. We'll be talking about the need to set up secure areas for humanitarian reasons in that part of the world. But it's a very complex picture, and we are not going to solve this unless we get a political agreement with all the regional actors, a position from the UK government, exactly a clear position, I beg your pardon, on Assad. My understanding now is that the Prime Minister is shifting his position on whether Assad can stay or go. But the key to this...
But it is changing all the time. I mean, we've got France taking action now. Things are changing day by day. So are both of you saying that really you're not saying there are no circumstances in which you would support British military involvement in airstrikes?
No, I'm not saying there are no circumstances, but voting for airstrikes is probably one of the most serious judgments a Member of Parliament has to take. And I would need to be entirely reassured that there is a proper plan in place, a proper strategic plan, a proper humanitarian plan, and a proper plan to bring together the regional players to find a political solution. And that's then it's incumbent now upon the Prime Minister to convince Parliament that he has such a plan.
George Parker, what is the likelihood of a vote coming soon, given the complications, and we've heard there all the various aspects to take on board?
Well, it all comes down to the parliamentary arithmetic, obviously, and David Cameron is looking to have a vote on this if he can, when the Commons comes back after the Conservative Party conference sometime around the middle of October. But what I'm told by my sources in Number 10 is that the arithmetic is by no means clear. The Conservatives think that at least 20 of their MPs could vote against extending military strikes to Syria. And David Cameron simply can't afford to lose another one of these votes. He lost, of course, the vote back in 2013. He wants to be certain that he can win, and that means he needs to be assured that at least 20 Labour MPs are going to come over to his side to make up for the 20 Tories who won't support him. And so far, I'm told the Conservative whips are not convinced that's going to happen. So unless they're absolutely certain, and unless David Cameron gets some kind of assurance from Jeremy Corbyn, I don't think we will have a vote.
George Parker, and thanks to Jonathan Arnott, Jonathan Ashworth and Natalie Bennett.